Every spring in Kentucky, new life begins. Foals take their first unsteady steps across the bluegrass, and broodmares graze quietly as they carry the next generation of champions. For a brief moment, everything feels calm, predictable, and full of promise. But hidden in the trees that line these pastures, there is a threat so small that most horse owners never notice it until it's too late. Because these are not just caterpillars. They are one of the most devastating and misunderstood dangers in modern horse breeding. And right now, they are back. So what are eastern tent caterpillars? Eastern tent caterpillars are a common spring insect found across much of the United States. However, in horse country, especially in Kentucky, they carry a much more serious significance. They hatch in early spring, often right as redbuds begin to bloom and temperatures start to rise. Almost immediately, they begin building their distinctive silky nests, which appears as white, web-like tents stretched between branches. These caterpillars prefer trees like wild cherry, apple, and crabapple. They live together in colonies, feeding on fresh leaves and gathering on their tents to absorb warmth from the sun. At first glance, they seem harmless, and in fact, to most people, they are simply another sign that winter has ended and spring has arrived. However, what makes eastern tent caterpillars dangerous is not what they do in the trees. It is what happens when they leave them. So when do caterpillars become dangerous? As these caterpillars grow, they begin to migrate away from their nests. They spread across the environment, crawling over fences, across driveways, into water troughs, and most importantly, into pasture grass. This is where the real danger begins. A grazing mare does not notice a caterpillar mixed into fresh spring grass. She does not avoid it. She simply eats as she normally would. And in that moment, something seemingly insignificant can turn into something devastating. Eastern tent caterpillars are not poisonous in the traditional sense, and instead, the danger comes from their structure. Their bodies are covered in thousands of microscopic barbed hairs, known as setae. These tiny hairs are sharp enough to embed themselves into tissue. When a pregnant mare ingests even a small number of these caterpillars, those hairs can penetrate the lining of her digestive tract. Once that barrier is compromised, bacteria that normally remain contained within the gut can enter the bloodstream. From there, those bacteria can travel throughout the body. When they reach the uterus, they can infect the placenta and disrupt the pregnancy. This condition is known as Mare Reproductive Loss Syndrome, or MRLS. Mare Reproductive Loss Syndrome is particularly devastating because it often shows no warning signs. A mare may appear completely healthy. She may continue eating, moving, and behaving normally. Then suddenly, she loses her foal. This can happen early in pregnancy where embryos are lost without obvious signs, or later when near-term foals are aborted. In some cases, foals are born weak and unable to survive. In others, they are stillborn. For breeders, this is not just a medical issue. It is an emotional and financial loss that can take years to recover from. In the early 2000s, Kentucky experienced one of the most severe equine reproductive crises in modern history. Thousands of mares across the state began aborting their foals, and at first no one understood why. Farms increased biosecurity measures, veterinarians searched for infectious diseases, and researchers worked urgently to identify the cause. Despite these efforts, the losses continued. By the time the connection was made to eastern tent caterpillars, the damage was already extensive. More than 3,500 foals were lost, and some estimates suggest that nearly 1/3 of Kentucky's entire foal crop disappeared in one season. Entire breeding operations were affected, and the industry was forced to confront a threat that had previously gone unnoticed. Today, concerns are rising again. Reports from Kentucky indicate that this year is shaping up to be a heavier than normal season for eastern tent caterpillars. Warm early spring conditions have accelerated their development, leading to earlier hatching and potentially larger populations. In many areas, caterpillars are already reaching the stage where they begin to move away from their nests. This stage is particularly dangerous because the caterpillars can travel significant distances, sometimes up to 100 yards from their original trees. This means they can easily enter open pasture areas, even on farms that do not appear heavily infested. For breeders, this is a serious concern. In Kentucky's thoroughbred industry, each foal represents years of planning, careful breeding decisions, and significant financial investment. However, beyond the financial impact, there is also a deeply emotional cost. Each lost foal represents a lost future. One of the most challenging aspects of Mare Reproductive Loss Syndrome is that there is no effective treatment once it begins. This makes prevention absolutely critical. The first step is early detection. Horse owners should regularly inspect trees, especially wild cherry and fruit trees, for the presence of caterpillar nests. These nests should be removed and destroyed before the caterpillars begin to spread. Tree management is also an important consideration. Reducing the number of host trees near broodmare pastures can significantly lower the risk of exposure. Equally important is monitoring pasture conditions. Many people focus only on the trees, but the greatest danger occurs when caterpillars are on the ground. If caterpillars are observed in grazing areas, immediate action should be taken. In high-risk situations, relocating pregnant mares away from affected pastures can be one of the most effective protective measures. Even temporary relocation during peak caterpillar movement can reduce the likelihood of ingestion. Finally, adjusting grazing practices can also help. Some farms limit grazing during high-risk periods or provide alternative feeding options to reduce exposure. These measures may seem simple, but they can have a profound impact. It would be easy to think of eastern tent caterpillars as a problem from the past, something that Kentucky has already faced and overcome. However, nature does not operate that way. Every year brings different conditions, and this year, all signs suggest increased risk. This is why veterinarians, agricultural experts, and breeders are paying close attention once again, because awareness is the most powerful tool we have. In the world of horses, we prepare for the danger we can see. We plan for injuries, monitor for disease, and carefully manage every aspect of care. But sometimes the greatest threat is something we barely notice, something small, something quiet, something that drifts down from the trees and disappears into the grass. In any single moment, it can change everything. So this spring, if you have horses, especially pregnant ones, take a closer look at your trees, because what you do not see may be the most important thing you miss.